This video was originally recorded February 2020 at the home of Robert and Menla Thurman in Woodstock, New York.
Click. Now, thank you very much, everyone, for attending my podcast. And I want to collectively thank people who have recently congratulated me, and many emails, I haven't answered all of them, upon my being recognized by the President of India Independent Committee to receive the Shri Padma Award, which is the fourth highest civilian award that the Indian government gives. And I was a little hesitant to receive due to the current stress in Indian society between sort of Hindu and Muslim bases. And but I noted that 20 or 30 Muslims are also receiving this award in this round. So that would put me a little bit at ease. Although it is nerve-wracking, this whole problem of pluralism and secularism, the Indian secularism that allowed India to be a true melting pot of religions, and which was not liked by the British, and therefore the British, in order to hold India back industrially and in terms of its development, I personally feel, they allowed the splitting of India into two pieces initially, a Muslim piece and a Hindu piece, but with Hindus and Muslims in the Muslim and Hindu pieces respectively, and causing the catastrophe of separation in 1947, and really horrendous. Children of darkness or something. There were all these terrible books, but there was a terrible reality. And one of my American predecessors in Tibetan studies, Theos Bernard, was murdered during that period in a certain place in India, predominantly Hindu, because his porters were Muslims and he was thought to be a Muslim along with them, and they were all killed. And I was really quite sad. And in general, and in particular, especially then for all the families. And I've always maintained, somewhat crazily, probably, as far as many people consider, that the only solution for this terrible Indo-Pakistan and Bangladesh separation is reunification. Because there are over 200 million Muslims in India, and there are many Hindus in India who had to flee Pakistan or Kashmir because of the separation, and who would truly love to be back in their ancestral home. And then on the planet, ultimately, there is no solution except for mutual respect, tolerance, even enthusiastic embrace between Hindus and Muslims on the planet, because there are both of them all over the planet. And this then includes Christians, Jews, and Taoists and secularists and Jains and Baha'i and whatever kind of religion you want, Zoroastrians, and a kind of secularism that was not like communist secularism, which is aggressively ideological and tries to destroy religions, but the benevolent or benign Indian secularism that respected all religions, the one that Dalai Lama makes Dalai Lama like the term secularism. I tried to tell him in writing for America that secularism is not seen as a benevolent toward religions, like militant atheists and this kind of thing, anti-religion. And it's all right for religious people to be anti-religion or spiritual people, but it's not good for militant secularism, like in the form of communism, for example. Nowadays, Chinese communists are assaulting the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang in East Turkestan, depending on how you look at it, and that area north of Tibet. And that's no excuse for that, and it's stupid, and it is immoral, and it doesn't work. Besides, it pretends it's trying to stop terrorism. extremism in religion, but actually it is extremism in the religion of communist secularism, which most of the middle-class Chinese communists have abandoned anyway because they're all capitalists. So it's really absurd. And it creates more terrorism, actually, and it creates extremism. Extremism breeds extremism. And the only way to overcome extremism is to absorb extremism within moderation, within patience and gentleness. Although self-defense is allowed, but it should be gentle self-defense, where the self-defense doesn't seek to annihilate the enemy that one is defending oneself against. It only seeks to restrain their violence, like martial arts type of self-defense. Of course, which is hard to muster on a mass or communal level, no doubt. There's no doubt about that. So anyway, I want to thank people for that. That's a digression about that. But in a way, it takes us to the general topic of secularism and mutual tolerance in religious things. And I'm very excited nowadays about trying to spend my also, I don't know if I've told my podcast audience that I have retired from active teaching at Columbia. I still actually, technically, I'm an unsalaried employee at Columbia to manage the Center for Buddhist Studies that we founded there until the next professor comes to fill my chair, which I helped create by helping raising the funds for an endowed chair. And doing that, by the way, what's called an endowed chair in a private university is a wonderful institution, because if you can do that, it guarantees the continuation of the field of study that you think is important and that the donor thinks is important. So you don't get a raise, and if you as a professor are helping to raise that money, it doesn't even give you a raise. They don't increase your salary by a penny. But what they do is they will replace you with someone in your field. Although, again, you don't get to say who that is. There's a tradition that the endowed chair occupant does not get it to be on the committee to select the successor, as a way of guaranteeing that it's not just a clone, which is probably a good thing, although frustrating to me at the moment. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who asked me to found an institution that would translate the 4,000 plus works, 4,000 or 5,000 works of the Tengyur, which includes many Kangyur works, scriptural works and scientific works, that is, the two categories. And he told the President of Columbia, by the way, did you know that, you know, of course, that Professor Thurman needs 3 lifetimes to finish his project? At which point the President of Columbia said, "Oh, that's really great, Your Holiness. I think that's a wonderful idea. But the problem is we don't have that reincarnation system here at Columbia." And I was there, and I wanted to say, as a joke, "You mean I can't reincarnate in my chair?" But I didn't, because then I wanted them to have a conversation. I didn't want to intrude my lowly humor. But actually, His Holiness was making his own exalted humor, actually, I must say. But what he meant had to do with the way the chair that I chartered is, that I raised funds for, is endowed, that they should appoint someone who themselves can do the same, supervise the same kind of research into translating these wonderful inner, what in ancient Indian science was called inner scientific writings and research. The physics and biology and chemistry and this kind of thing, and architecture and medicine and all that sort of thing, which Indian ancient sciences have and had and still have, actually, because in their culture they allow that to still be legal under certain quality controls by the government. They don't just ban ancient herbal knowledge and things like that, or leave it to the realm of snake oil salesmen, as we do here, and then also sort of make it semi-illegal to create a monopoly by what I call industrial medicine, or that is to say medicine that considers the human being a machine. a material machine rather than having a mental or spiritual component. So these are called the inner sciences, meaning dealing with the mind as if it really exists, and which does not go against the outer sciences in ancient India or in the modern time. Like, for example, the Dalai Lama loves the material scientists, and he talks with them all the time. He, at certain boundary areas of the material sciences, he gets where he's a little amused by the inability of the materialist scientists to get rid of their dogma that they can't look at the mind as an independent force in nature, that they can't, they can deal with the problem of mass versus energy, massless energy. They can deal with that, but they can't deal with mass or matter, and then the problem of massless mind. Mind and energy both being problematic for industrial scientists because they don't have mass. Energy supposedly has to go through a huge equation to get to be mass, and to extract the energy from mass, have to go through a nuclear explosion. So, but yet they interact, energy and mass and matter as mass, and therefore energy somehow is still considered material, though there's no mass, which is interesting. But mind says it has no mass, and yet it can't be even considered, period, which is irrational, completely irrational. So, so anyway, this is this is one of my favorite topics, but I don't want to launch into that. I'm a little rambling. You see, what I really want to talk about today, anyway, I want to thank you about that first. Then second, what I really want to talk about today is politics from the Buddhist point of view. And of course, politics in my mind, and I hope in everyone's mind who's listening to this, and who at least they'll think about, that politics today must be entwined with climate crisis. Because the foremost enemy, I've said this before, but let me repeat, the foremost enemy of every nation state on this planet is the blob, the stranger thing. And this is an even stranger thing than the underground blob in the movie, what's occasionally surfacing to look like some monster. But the stranger thing is the invisible cloud of carbon and methane and other such heat-trapping chemicals in the atmosphere, invisible and hard to fight because it's invisible. It has the cloak of, it's like a Klingon ship having a cloak of invisibility. So you don't know how to shoot at it. They triumphal movies about materialist militarism. Independence Day, they defeat the enemy because the enemy is visible. They have big machines, they're very powerful, but finally they get defeated by, Will Smith or whoever it is. The heroes, they get them. And because they can see them. So my point is, this one we can't see. But, a lot of politics, like every political leader on the planet, every president or prime minister is considered commander-in-chief of the armed forces. And every nation state spends a much higher proportion of its budget on military than it should really need to spend. Or even if it has a core, like a military core, they're too much sitting around waiting to have a violent defense action or an aggressive offense action, rather than, for example, fixing the pollution in the environment, helping with floods and hurricanes and things that is left to some kind of, temporary civil defense sort of thing, or, so, and then, or reserves, whereas our military should really be a Peace Corps. It really should be fused with the Peace Corps. And there should be some preparation in case of some sort of physical invasion from other nation states. But actually, everyone could get together next September at the UN, every single head of state, including every dictator and including every president and prime minister, and say, look, we hereby pledge to each other, to the world, to our own citizens in every language, that we will all cease any form of aggression against each other withdraw from any ongoing aggressions against each other for the moment, even though we will not resolve perhaps whatever our discussion is or our conflict or our disagreement. And we will focus 10%, 20% of all our military-oriented resources, let's say even 20%, and we'll focus that on climate crisis challenge response. So and of course, we'll remove subsidies away from all fossil fuel industries. And if we're a country that operates on fossil fuels, we will move all development resources. We'll maintain fossil fuel production at a lesser level because the infrastructure of the world is still adapted to that. But we will decrease any expansion enormously, and we will spend all otherwise, new refineries, new pipelines, new anything like that. None of that will we spend a penny on. And instead, we will spend those monies on switching to renewables. And actually, we'll make our country, if like Saudi Arabia, the whole industry of the country is fossil fuel. And like Russia has come to be almost like that, oil and gas. And a few other countries, Persia is like that. And Iraq is like that. But we'll switch those countries to renewables. And the ones that are in deserts, by the way, were ideal for being kings of the renewable industries, in that by creating wonderful electrical backbones from their desert, low rainfall countries to more higher rainfall countries, and then creating, instead of pipelines, creating fabulous electrical backbones to sell power to countries that have less solar power. Just like wind areas can do that. And we need to create a whole new electrical grid. And then, of course, they can put, as far as if they feel that this is military money, they can put some money into defending the different backbone lines and power grids, so that in case hostilities reemerge after the climate challenge has been somewhat met, sort of a green warfare, they can put their things, they can each defend their own respective economic spheres in regard to creating renewable and distributed power production, and creating new power green infrastructure. So this could happen. It's within the ability of human beings to choose such an option and realize that the enemy is our overproduction of carbon. And this will change the agricultural industry. It will change food production. We will have food surplus by not feeding animals so much, by stopping feedlots and stopping industrial production of animal food. Some people will still want to eat meat, and there'll be a more limited market for that. Probably a lot of people will find an industry and chemistry and food production processing can figure out all kinds of ways of making delicious products out of vegetable products, vegetable protein, just the way, because it's very inefficient feeding thousands of pounds of corn to pigs to produce a few pounds of pork, pigs and cows and other such animals, And it's besides being inhumane and unnecessary. So it's not like the climate. Greta Thunberg is feeling very upset with us all, older people, rightly so, because we act like we're helpless and there's nothing we can do. But we tell our children, well, you're not ready to do anything yet. You go to school, and don't take drugs and don't have too much fun, and don't drink and don't do whatever, But then when it comes to actually saving their future, as she puts it, which means saving the environment they have to live in of the next decades after 2030, we say we're helpless. There's nothing we can do. It's not, it would be so disruptive. Oh, no, we can't do that. We have to just go on with business as usual. And that's really not true. We can all make changes right now, right away, like she asks us. Definitely. And it is happening. I think I'm very happy. BlackRock won't invest in developing fossil fuel. But then we still have people like, the Trump administration and the Republican senators and Democrats too, who are on the payroll of fossil fuel companies and who write them this $20 billion check every year to keep producing more fossil fuel and polluting pipelines and terrible tar sands where you have more polluting energy goes into extracting the polluting energy that they then sell at a higher price. I mean, it's ridiculous. Really is ridiculous that we allow this to continue, and we really must stop. And I think this year, I'm very optimistic actually, that this year is the year when something like the scenario that I'm talking about will happen, actually. I really do think so. I think that this election in the U.S., in spite of all the vote suppression cheating, that's the most serious problem at the moment to me. This failure to impeach a irresponsible and highly unfit person who's as president, clownish type of fellow, is sad, but that's not the major thing. The major thing is the continuation of the anti-climate crisis, infrastructure and economic system. And that is now being controlled against the will of the American people majority by corrupt politicians and in this country. And then this country sets a kind of tone and standard still, which we can't evade our responsibility for, even though we have so many of our own problems, but we still do set a kind of standard for all these either dictators or democracies around the world. And because our media, the way it is, we just do set it. We're losing the power to do it by destroying our friendships and reliance and actually destroying the respect that we have from other people. But this criminal regime that is currently in charge, including those senators and people in the House, the minority in the House, and some people in the Democratic Party as well, and of course the executive. But I think that will change. I think that if a big mass of people go out there and realize what is the real priority of the time of this decade, the 20s, the Common Era 2020s, then I think that no amount of vote cheating will help, and we'll get it back, and then we'll stop the vote cheating, and then it'll get better and better throughout the decade, and we will really succeed. And what we need to do is we need to cut 10% every year, starting 2021. For 10 years, we need to cut 10% each year of our fossil fuel emissions, go back into a renewed and a revitalized and reinvigorated Paris Accord, and then also you spend money, even from defense discretionary budget and other sources, to make sure that the so-called developing countries don't still indulge in coal and move to distributed and leapfrog. Like in Africa, they leapfrogged a wired phone system, centralized wire phone system, from very poor communication system right into cell phones, for example. Now, of course, there may be some radiation problem with that. I acknowledge some kind of carcinogenic thing of the high density radiation, but nevertheless, it's still good. It's good for communication and for education and for knowledge in those countries. And so similarly, they can leapfrog over persistent coal and oil and gas in producing industrially what their market needs to be produced and what their economy needs, and do so on the basis of distributed power generation and a green, in other words, a leapfrog to a green economy and to a green infrastructure. There's no reason that they couldn't do that, and it is in our own interest, and it is in global interest for us to pay. It's not an altruistic thing like to give, to remove a few $100 billion from overbloated defense establishment, for example, and put that to defend our air and our environment from abuse heaped upon it by developing countries that want to have a lifestyle like ours and are still using the dirty things that we use, and to pay them not to do that and to accelerate their leapfrogging into a green economy is a rational defense expenditure. It defends us against floods and hordes of refugees. It defends us against destructive warfare. It defends us against polluting of the planet, and therefore it is a defense. And if everybody recognized that this is the crisis of the time, then this would change politics, and politics would go into. It's so interesting. The planet itself is teaching us in a way. If you use what the Buddhists call, the esoteric Buddhists call, mirror wisdom, you look into the planet, the material planet, as if it were a mirror of reality, and what it shows you is that abuse of that planet is self-abuse. It's harming yourself. If you form an industry, decide you're going to make billions of dollars in your limited decades of life, and in doing so, you're going to maybe wreck the environment where tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people live, and you say, never mind, that's just the way everybody does, someone else will do it if I don't. You're actually destroying your own life, is what you're doing, and your family's life, and the money will not help, and you will die anyway, and then, very importantly, you'll be back, and you'll be back in a bad situation, which you will have created for no good reason but for a stack of numbers, stack of dollar bills, which were produced at the expense of forests. Too much worthless paper, right? And once you're in your coffin, your $1 billion is useless to you, completely useless. That you wasted a lot of your life energy producing it and accumulating it will be a source of tremendous regret to your soul being, your soul ghost persona, looking at your rotten body and the corpse all rouged up with a tuxedo on, or a wedding dress or whatever, ball gown, if you're female, and you will realize what a complete waste of so many precious moments of your previous human life it was, sitting around accumulating that money at the expense of others. It was useless. The life, what supported your life and that of your family and of your community was useful. And if you're really good at it, you might have been wealthy, that's okay. But the extreme level of it was completely useless. Absolutely. And even destructive. So that's the thing about the politics. So we mustn't worry, and we mustn't be dragged down to hate. There was a marvelous thing in the New Yorker of the Congress building as a barricaded room with people on two sides actually engaging in a physical fight. And it's really too bad. But then what is the alternative? Now, it is true that since Nixon, what has happened, since the New Deal, even, let's go back further, since the New Deal, and pretty much the democratic hegemony, although opposed by Goldwater and opposed by others, but up until Nixon, in a way, it was all, really Eisenhower was okay, although he was a Republican, because he'd been a military man and he warned against the military-industrial complex, and he didn't want to really, fight with anybody, and he wasn't into empowering some economic elite because he was a military man, so he knew he depended on his troops and so on. He had done that. So there, I think, although I think Nixon began under Eisenhower, if you look back, at being a faction which chose to be aligned more with the Republicans than the Democrats, where they refused to be a loyal opposition. Democracy involves that when you can fight in a campaign to prevail with your party, but then when you lose to the other party, you govern the countries rationally with the other part, the dominant party at that time, and then you vow to return at some point, and you may emphasize during your cooperating with the party that they made this mistake and that mistake, and building on that, you can campaign against them when the next election comes up. but you are a loyal opposition. In other words, you align with them in the major priorities of the nation. And Nixon started to undercut that as the vice president of Eisenhower because of his connections to, I think, underworld figures, the Miami Mafia people who were connected to the Cuba issue, in connection to some kind of Western folks and, corporate people who didn't like unions, and they didn't like having their salaries cut down to a modest figure during the war by Roosevelt and so on. And they didn't like labor unions, really didn't like labor unions. And this already in the 50s, they were plotting how to overthrow this entire sort of middle class, unionized, more, not that there still weren't really wealthy people, but it was more democratized and more unionized. And there was, big education systems like the California one, the land grant colleges, which became the state university systems, and the mass of people were getting more educated and so forth. And so this lack of loyal opposition was brewing up there in the 50s. And Goldwater and people like that represented it. And then Nixon got himself elected in 68 because corruption in the Democratic Party created the inability to deal honestly with the post-Kennedy assassination, and may indeed have been involved in the Kennedy assassination. And so, which was kind of, and LBJ was a key figure there, where he both did civil rights. He tried to do that after, to prevent more burnings of Detroits and things like that. But he also engaged in the criminal lie-induced war in Vietnam, and he was very too much in the hands of the military-industrial complex. So so the Democrats was no longer commanded the allegiance of the masses in such a way that the disloyal opposition was not able to subvert them. But the way in which Nixon was a non-loyal opposition person was that he bribed Thieu, the president of South Vietnam in 1967, not to go to the Geneva peace talk that Johnson was doing in order to give his successor, Humphrey, a chance at winning the election of 68, and also continuing the Great Society and all of the positive things that he had tried to do. And once Ho Chi Minh agreed to go, and the executive agreed to go, the president agreed to go, but Nixon, as the opponent of the rival, went and committed an act of treason by undermining the president's plan to make peace in Vietnam, and by doing so to be able to use the anti-war energy in America in 67 and 68 to win the election, which he then did, and then, of course, betrayed that by engaging in ever bigger war to pay off his corrupt promise to Thieu, that he would if Thieu didn't make peace, Nixon would see to it that North Vietnam was conquered, which the opposite occurred. North Vietnam, in fact, conquered South Vietnam, so we didn't have a North Korea-South Korea situation in Vietnam, which would have been less painful for the Vietnamese people had we had that. We would have developed like South Korea right away, and many more American deaths, and a lot of other corrupt things, that Nixon did. And so that was the beginning of the lack of loyal opposition. But then there was enough loyal opposition energy still in the Republican Party that when Nixon went too far in 72, with his plumbers and everything, he got impeached. So then we seemed to be back on a little bit better track, and we got Jimmy Carter after Ford's caretaker thing and the unfortunate pardoning of Nixon without investigation, which would have been pardoned with investigation, would have been fine. So then Reagan, he beats Carter by committing treason, where his campaign promises weapons to the Ayatollah in order to keep the hostages in the embassy past the election date. And also he commits a kind of treason undermining desegregation by promising the racists in the South that he would undermine busing and states' rights and, et cetera, all the dog whistling that they started doing toward the white supremacists in America. But the key thing was treason. And then in office, he did the treason thing in Latin America with the Contras and all of that, and the Ollie North and so on. So more criminal behavior on the part of the executive, in other words. Then we get Clinton, but by now the Democrats are equally corrupt as the Republicans. And so Clinton deregulates the economy, and stops the Glass-Steagall Act, which prevented another 1929 meltdown. And he does things that lead to the 207 meltdown of the banking system and so on. So then we have both of them being pretty corrupt, although Gore is better, and he has a climate thing, and he's aware of what it is, and he's against tobacco and this and that. So again, but now it's like there's corruption on both sides. And then Bush, the corruption has gone into the Supreme Court with Rehnquist. So then they hand a lost election by Bush to Bush, and they prevent Gore from being our first climate president 20 years ago. And that's treason, That's internal treason against democracy. And then 9/11, the breaking of the post-World War II New World Order, where you don't invade other countries aggressively, and there's no such thing as a preemptive aggression doctrine. That's a Hitler doctrine. And that was engaged in by Bush and Cheney on the excuse of 9/11, which they may have very well allowed to happen, especially Cheney. I don't think Bush knew what was going on, particularly. But Cheney allowed it to happen, I believe. Definitely. So that, which is, of course, not only treason, it's total treason. And then, again, the ultimate treason, of course, is Trump inviting the Russians to impede and destroy the proper counting in several swing states and corruption of our elections. And now he's openly continuing to do it. And then he's abetted by openly treasonous Moscow Mitch McConnell, who is also funded by Deripaska and other Russian oligarchs. And so when under Bush 1, we supposedly won the Cold War, these treasonous, non-loyal opposition people are handing the democracy's planetary victory to all kinds of dictators and oligarchs. And that's where we are. So back to loyal opposition. But now, because we're there, that doesn't mean that, some kind of weak, let's all be bipartisan thing by someone who is not really owning up to this whole corruption issue is plausible. It isn't. So therefore, the Democrats have to be kind of more firm, and they did do so by this proper exercise of impeachment, which they were forced to do by this level of corruption that was displayed, even though they knew that it would be covered up by corrupt senators who did do that. But then the last voice of reason is Mitt Romney. His one vote, 1 out of 2, half of one person, showed a little bit on corruption. So that's something to build on. In this kind of, in a way, it's sort of like we can, I wouldn't say that it was good. It isn't. It's been very bad. But it's like nature bringing us to the worst possible moment to get us to rise to the occasion to get back to creating the best of all possible worlds. which we are going to do. We're going to do it if we believe in a merciful God, if we're theists, because why would he want the human race and all the animals to live in the worst of all possible worlds, in hell? Why would he want to create hell out of a nice human and animal and mammalian environment? And, hell is deep underneath in the magma. And in the outer space of the cold, icy cold, like non-solar heated planets and stars and asteroids. And so why would a merciful God allow this to happen? And definitely Buddha, who is definitely also merciful, but lacks omnipotence, why would he but is very competent in shaping environments and in education, extremely enlightened, competent. And why would he and the many Buddhas, it's not only one, even though he's not omnipotent, there's a huge army of them, infinite numbers, of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And why would they allow this to happen? So we should take heart. It won't happen. And also we're blessed. We have wonderful people who speak up, like Greta Thunberg. And they won't stop. They are shamans, they are oracles. They speak for Mother Earth, they speak for the other species, the animals that we're obliterating, and they speak for their future generations. And they care about their parents. They might not let their mom fly to her opera appointments, but which is a little harsh of her, I think, really, a little bit, but a little bit strict. But mom does it because she deeply respects the voice of Mother Gaia. It comes through her fragile little daughter. And we have to listen. And we are going to listen. And we are listening. And finally, the voice of the planet is coming into its own. And it will help us, give us the courage and the stamina to change our politics. And yes, Marianne, beloved, dear Marianne, we will be doing this resistance and even ferocity if we have to be a little bit fierce with our former non-loyal opposition people and traitors and treasonous. If we have to be a little fierce with them, we will do it out of love for them. For example, I do believe 100%, dear Nancy Pelosi, that she does honestly pray for the president, for his well-being. I believe that, while moving forcefully to impeach him and trying to show people in the world. She knows she's teaching there. She's not doing that unobserved. When she does it on mass televisions, rips up the speech on State of the Union, she's saying these are all lies. These are not worth listening to. And, this man is deluding himself and drawing you into the delusion. And I refuse to be drawn in, and she tore it up. And it's a brave thing. But I totally believe when she went home, she prayed for him. And I do too. And my expression is fierce compassion. And therefore I never translate those fierce-looking seraphs or cherubs or Tibetan deities, Indian deities. I never call them wrathful, because they're not wrathful. They're just fierce. They're loving. They're not angry with anybody. But sometimes someone who is harming others and himself or herself by doing bad things that should be stopped, one has to adopt a fierce posture with that person to help them. And for example, to remove Trump from office, as he certainly should have been done according to all reason, all the Constitution, democratic principles, simple morality, he absolutely should have been removed. And every single judge that he and McConnell have appointed should be removed, who are unqualified to be judges, who are just ideologues. And every single head of agency who he's appointed to destroy the work of the agency should be removed immediately. Out of self-interest, out of self-defense for the country, for the planet, and out of simple morality. There's no doubt about that. So as much as I despise his behavior and his acts, I genuinely feel compassion for him because he's making his life worse and worse. He thinks he's feeling happier and happier when he kills Soleimani, for example, does an assassination of an official of another country and puts us on the danger of war, which will cause deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions, and he feels proud and he puffs up because by doing that, he distracts himself from the fact that internally he feels terrible. He feels deprived. He feels unloved. He feels no inner sense of life force much at all. So he has some kind of very strong constitution whereby he feels that he can sort of put a lot of energy into that distraction, and he can draw other people who don't feel well into identifying with him because they only will be thinking, and they can distract them from their not feeling well. So he spreads, the type of sickness that he has and the bad feeling that he has is one that enables him to draw in a small group of people, relatively small group of people, who are equally afflicted. So if you have I have that sense, but now Nancy Pelosi has to physically meet with the guy, so she can feel the extreme field and aura of unease within him and around him. She can feel that, and she therefore feels a mother's sympathy for such a completely overwound up person. And so she genuinely feels that this is really not good for him. He's in a position of pressure and stress that he cannot possibly handle. He's way too ignorant, and he keeps doing all the wrong things, which make it worse. And therefore, removing him from office is an act of mercy. It's an act of compassion. And removing him to some environment where he doesn't have such a stress, maybe Mar-a-Lago. And if he were removed from office, I think a lot of his high-paying clients would leave. It wouldn't be, he would live in there in relatively more humble circumstances. And they definitely should not turn the page like Obama wrongly did at the end of the neocon bad invasions of Iraq and other negative activities. That was completely wrong. He could have pardoned everybody, but not turned the page on investigating their ill deeds. So these deeds should have been investigated, and crimes should have been registered, and then, compassionate sentencing and compassionate rehabilitation efforts undergone rather than just punishment-oriented imprisonment and so forth. And but you can't turn the page in ignoring what happened, or you can't correct it in the future. So that was completely wrong of Obama when he got elected in 2008, one of his many mistakes. Although, again, since I like him so enormously, I imagine he was threatened, actually, physically, by this disloyal opposition, by the real deep state, or deep non-state actors, which I would rather call them. And if you have billions, and you're very, very walled up inside a worldview where you don't care for masses of people, and so you don't mind harming them, hiring one assassin for one hit is a minor expense. Even if it's a high-profile hit, it's not a big expense. And when you're making pure material calculations, it's inconceivable that such people who are demonic in their wiring, they are also human beings. They also have a heart. They could receive therapy to become truly caring people. They could be born again, definitely, but they're not acting that way now. And therefore they need fierce compassion and not turning the page and ignoring them. But it may have been impossible because had you turned the page, you might have been killed. I realize that. So, but anyway, we're getting now to where I just don't think it depends on any one person, because everyone is waking up to the tornado in the neighborhood, the flood down the street, the flood upriver that's coming downriver. Everyone is alerted to all of this. The the fall spring that destroys their apple crop for the year, and hence their livelihood. And they are alerted that everything is out of balance on the planet. And it's to add in a way that everywhere there's these oligarchs and these really powerful, omnipotent beings, is very good because they can make quick decisions. They don't have to go through a whole bureaucratic committee process. And by the way, this is another little political thing, since I've been quite political in this talk, I think. And that is the Elizabeth and Bernie, who rightly are calling for a political revolution, which is, of course, the only option to the violent actual revolution that will occur and result in sort of waves of lockdowns and revolutions and a lot of bloodshed. If we don't have a political one means peaceful one, ballot box, etc., rather than actual shooting, and blood spilling. And so we do need that. And therefore they're right not to go to high-profile donor dinners and accept millions of dollars from high-worth individuals, billionaires, and then be beholden to them and obligated to them and unable to rein them in when they get elected, which is what has been happening. And so they're absolutely right not to do that. I agree. But when billionaires like Bloomberg, Steyer, and any other get involved in trying to fix the mess that our politics has devolved into, then they should be welcomed. And they should be allowed even although you say you cannot give me, my individual campaign, your billion, because, then I'm beholden to you personally, me personally. So I won't accept it. But you can spend $1 billion informing people of the situation, of the facts of the situation, and why we need a political revolution. So we welcome your help. And even, you can run for office if you want. If you really mean that once you have bought your office, which we're calling it derogatorily, but actually you do have to run and go out and put your name on a ballot and whatever, however much money you spend. And so if you do run for office with a sincere plan to fix the court, to fix Citizens United, to fix the Congress, to bring in, also spending some of your billions to bring in senators who have integrity, keep the Mitt Romneys and eliminate the Mitch McConnells and the Susan Collinses and the McCluskeys and the other corrupt ones, and bring back the Flake, although he flaked, but anyway, bring him back. And then I welcome you doing that. Then that's redemption for you, for however you made your billions, whatever advantages you took of whatever. I'm not judging all of that. You did it all legally, and now you're being committed as a patriot and as a planetary patriot. What do we call it when you're patriotic for the planet? Matriot, maybe. Mother Earth, a patriot and a matriot. And by all means, use your billions for that purpose. I welcome it. I don't feel contempt for you. I'm not angry with you. I'm thankful to you. But I'm not beholden to you personally. So you can expect me, if you help me get elected, to tax you and to see that your monopolies are broken up more reasonably when it's reasonable, and see to it that that wealth is better distributed amongst your employees and that there are unions in your companies and so forth. You can count on me to go against that extremism of laissez-faire capitalism that has benefited you. Financially, it has not benefited you physically, spiritually, morally, mentally, in any other way. I actually believe when you get too extremely wealthy, it's a burden on you, is my belief. But you can expect me to try to undo the extremism of current, oligarch capitalism. But I welcome your using and devoting your resources to that purpose. By all means, I'd be happy to have you, a real billionaire in the White House who's not seeking to use the White House to try to actually pretend to be a billionaire. That would be a big relief. It really would. But you can count on me to hold your feet to the fire to do what you say you're doing, of course, if you did get in the White House. Anyway.
This video was brought to you in part through the generous support of Tibet House US membership community and viewers like you. To learn more about the benefits of Tibet House membership, please visit tibethouse.us. Thanks for watching. Tashi Delek.